Um, there you are, David.
Hey, how are you, Antoine?
Good, good, good to see you. How have you been?
Yes, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, just
Okay, great, great.
yeah.
So, I've already had a bit of a chat with people about our earlier interaction, but let me just quickly do a formal introduction and then we'll start off with the conversation.
Sure.
So, David is the Chief Agricultural Advisor for Araku Coffee and the Naandi Foundation. He came to India in 1971 and settled in Pondicherry and Tamil Nadu, where he developed a dairy and cheese factory. And David is now completely Indian, and he even has the Indian head bobble, as you will notice in the conversation.
Gotta hold that straight.
He has been appointed to the Indian Coffee Board Advisory Council for the Palni region from 2003. He was a co-director of the Basil Academy, Mysore, and has been a past consultant to SRTT, IFAD, and FAO. His special interest has been the application of organic principles to the various fields of agriculture. At Naandi Araku Coffee, he oversees sustainable livelihoods for small and marginal farmers and gives expert input in supply chain management and the importance of shared value to ensure agriculture is profitable. So, David, as I was explaining to our listeners before about Araku Valley and the coffee, it's up in a forest. And from what I understand, you all actually save the forest to ensure that the plantation could survive. So, could you tell me a little bit more about your work over there?
Well, one of the things that struck me when I was living in the Polynesies for many years was the fact that coffee in India particularly is a shade-grown crop. It doesn't survive. It's not happy without shade. It just burns up, gets stressed, and doesn't yield. So the wonderful thing about it, it's a very ecological sort of crop. And when you look at where it grows on all the watersheds of India. It's on the Western Ghats, it's on the Palani Hills, it's even in the Eastern Ghats. They're all watersheds. And so from that point of view, it's extremely important ecologically as a crop, how we grow it. And that is what inspired me to get so involved in coffee, originally in the Polynesies, but also when I got the opportunity to work at scale in the Eastern Ghats, in particular in Araku, was the fact that you could make a tremendous impact downstream as well as for the community that's growing the crop, because depending on how you grow it, and it's as I always used to say, you know, agriculture is an ecological act. And in that way, you can do it the positive side or you can do it the negative. And the negative is our conventional agriculture where anything goes. They have no scruples about putting every and any poison onto the crop with least concern about the consumer. And I'm saying that in a sort of a very strident way because I feel very strongly about it. So coffee grew naturally as a forest species. Then when everyone got a little greedy and started taking more out of the forest than it could supply to the coffee, then they had to come in with artificial fertilizers. With artificial fertilizers came lifestyle diseases like leaf rust, berry borer, stem borer, and black rot, all the things that are going to attack the coffee if the coffee is not well looked after. So from an ecological point of view, if you cross the boundary and do not adhere to the growing conditions that a coffee needs, you inevitably are going to have pollution right there in the watershed. And that water is going to wash off. It's going to go into the downstream. It's going to pollute the waterways and the groundwater right next to the cities like the Visakhapatnam and the Eastern Ghats, like the Palani Temple City in the Polynesies. And so what you do is you have this kind of like spin-off of ecological disaster if you do not adhere to certain principles. And that's what inspired me about the opportunity of working in Araku, is that we could work with the community. They were very open to the ecological ways that we talked about. In fact, they taught us a lot of things about it, because they are people of the forest. So they talk to the forest. They know what trees like. They feel for the trees. It took us quite a couple of 3 years to even convince them to start pruning shade trees, because, you know, the tree would get hurt, you know. So there was a lot of give and take. There was a lot of negotiation had to go on in order to be able to get to a point where we could discuss the idea of shade management. And so this, the beautiful thing about that community is that they have this direct connection with nature, and we don't want to disturb that. We want to somehow or another enhance it.
But David, I mean, when you went there, the condition of the forest wasn't actually very great. I mean, despite of this connection and everything, you did have, I mean, you did have to kind of revive it. You did have to do work.
We did. There was a tremendous amount of attrition as a result of a community that was sort of like pushed out of whatever residual forest was there. Forest department technically owned all the land, so they settled in villages, and a lot of that forest, a lot of the forest was mined by the British themselves. They took out a lot of very valuable hardwoods there, and there was a whole rebellion against the British way back in the 20s as a result of that. And not many people know about it, where the tribals actually fought the British for 5 years. To get them out of their forest, and so there was a leader, and finally they got him. They had him killed, but it took 3 battalions of British Army to come and actually find them. You know, so they had a guerrilla warfare going on there. So there was a great attachment to the forest, and our work with the farmers was how do we grow a forest that a functional forest. A forest that they can get an income from, that they can get multiple incomes. It can be a source of firewood, it can be a source of timber, it can be a source of fruit. So that was the negotiation.
So I just want to clarify this notion of a functional forest, because, you know, in Europe we see these replanted forests which have really, like, you know, monocultures. Is that what you are talking about, or what is your idea?
No, so this is what we can distinguish. You know, even in the coffee board, they have what we call the commercial forestry department, which deals in what we call plantation. It's quite different to the original forest. So our idea is, as much as possible, to create more and more diversity. I mean, originally the coffee board and the government, they had this idea that coffee can only grow under silver oak, which is crazy, because it's actually it's an Australian tree, you know. And being an ex-Kiwi, I mean, who wants Australians around, you know? So we had a long negotiation to sort of like bring in diversity into that forest culture, bringing in fruit trees, bringing in more and more diverse shade trees, and basically creating a terroir sort of condition whereby the community of trees would have a much more complex soil food web, which could help the coffee grow better, because coffee depends upon this symbiotic relationship and its roots with the forest. And if you have just a single species, then you have, you know, like it's only going to supply a certain number of nutrients. But if you have a rich diversity of different trees, particularly indigenous trees, and let's say leguminous trees like dadops and even Glaracidia, trees that can, mimosa, trees that can actually add nutrients to the roots of the coffee, then you start talking about a coffee that's much happier in its environment, and whatever fruit it gives is going to be much more nutrient dense.
Okay, I just want to take you up on the word terroir that you used. It's a word that, you know, is normally used in the field of wine, and where particularly in France, where people talk about terroir and grapes and the connection. It is a composite connection between the quality of the soil and the weather and the agricultural practices. So when you say terroir with coffee, it sounds a little bit out of place for me. So will you connect the two for me?
Well, actually, terroir is a term that people got accustomed to in reference to wine, but terroir is everywhere. We can have a terroir for growing brinjals. We can have a terroir for growing wheat. We can have a terroir for growing all sorts of fruit trees. You know, I mean, you have the Alphonse mangoes in a particular area, this Ratnagiri area, that's a terroir of mangoes, you know, and it's got a distinctive aroma, distinctive sort of fragrance, and those particular combination of climate, soil, and the creativity of the farmer, if you like, creates that magical thing that we call terroir, and it's that which gives the quality. So you can apply the term to any foodstuff. You can even have a miroir, where you have, you know, the fish of the sea that like a particular. I remember when I was a kid, I used to love going onto the reefs and then the east coast of New Zealand and fishing for certain fish because they were only in a particular place. So we even have that terminology called a miroir, which is a terrain of the sea, which has a particular thing for a particular species, whether it's a moki, a groper, or the North Sea cod is another one that had a particular terroir. So terroirs can be vast in its application, but particularly for culinary delights like coffee and tea, as well as wine, terroir is very important because people are tasting, and then you have experts come in and then they ooh and they ah and they spit and then they taste and they can perceive these different qualities. That's what I dream of for all of our foodstuffs.
So when you're talking about terroir, then it implies that different coffees in different places will have different characteristics. Is that something that you have found at Araku then?
Absolutely. And how you curate your particular plots, your terroirs, will determine what the result will be. I mean, you can have a very, very ordinary coffee, but then you come in with certain activities, creative acts of the farmer, in conjunction with his understanding of the climate, in conjunction with his understanding how he creates buffer zones, how he manicures the trees, how he inoculates the soil with his microbial cultures, which, you know, when you were in Araku, you saw all those different flower cultures that we add. Those are the magical elements that create that minerality in the soil that the coffee then picks up and gives back into the fruit. And it's that element that gives the taste.
So could you give me some concrete examples of, you know, Araku coffee where you have noticed these different terroirs and how it's expressed itself?
Okay, so I can give a very classic example of we have one of our SKUs, one of our coffees is what we call microclimate, and that, because we distinguished a particular taste that came from an area that was grown on an island in one of the backwaters, and that island was quite far from the mainland, and the farmers, they had to go out and plant the coffee on this island, and this island had a particular soil. It had you know, been flooded originally, and it was surrounded by water. So obviously it had a high humidity, so the climatic condition of humidity was there. You had a distinguishing soil because it was actually, being a backwater, it was actually a residual area of a riverbed. So you had this nice mix of alluvial soil with clay, some very interesting composite of soils there, which were unique. And so when we tasted this, we said, okay, this has this particular terroir, it has to have its own profile. It has to have a distinguishing feature, which we'll call microclimate. So that's it's an example. Another example is, let's say the Grand Reserve, which is a very complex coffee, which is grown at high altitude. It's grown under diverse shade of indigenous trees. So therefore you have a whole soil food web that gives that complexity to the plant, the cherry. And then the coffees have that particular minerality, which we can call, now that is a very complex notes. And all of the when we do blind testing with our guys that come in from the Cup of Excellence, they can go through these different SKUs and they can say, oh my God, wow, what did you do there? And where is that from? Can I see that plot? You know, and they get all very excited because then I can identify with those localities. And being high altitude, that means the coffee is denser because it takes longer to mature. It's the last of the coffees to harvest because it takes longer to mature. Therefore, the density of the beans, there's more cells in the beans. It's denser. It's got more lipids. And so when we do that first crack of the roasting, there's an explosion of lipids and those tastes come out so much more richer. And that's when you get into the art of coffee, and that's when it becomes exciting.
Wow, I can see your face lighting up, David, when you talk about it.
Yeah, well, I'm right there into that plot, you know, so I'm starting to live there.
Yeah, I can just imagine that. Are you, I mean, right now, the notion of terroir is theoretical, but are you also thinking of working on a legal framework to actually demarcate these as different regions and to kind of, brand them as names, so to speak?
Well, we have the brand Araku, and within that you have a subtext of these terroir SKUs. So they're unique to Araku. I don't think anyone can replicate it. So that's the great thing. I mean, obviously the brand Araku is registered with us, and so that is there. So we just have to make it so that the taste is authentic, and every year we do more and more to do that. And so what we find over the years, as we work with these cultures, these soil cultures, enriching the soil, putting more mulch, getting more soil organic carbon into the soil, we're getting these richer and richer tastes. We're getting a lot more floral notes, a lot of spice notes that are coming in, which particularly the Koreans love. They love those spice notes, and they keep asking if we're putting pepper into it, and are the pepper vines influencing the coffee? And I said, no, it's coming through the minerality of the soil. You can ask the microbes,
Wow.
That's exactly what's happening. Yeah, that's the magic of it.
One of the things that I really found interesting and what I really liked about Araku is that, a lot of when it comes to forest and natural resources, there's both a government policy and pretty much an international policy as well that you remove people from the ecosphere, you remove people from the ecosystem. You see people as being, a problem over there. But you guys are actually working with the two together, and there is a synergy, a kind of a symbiotic relationship, really, which you are encouraging.
Absolutely. In fact, the term ecology, we tend to think of it as some kind of environment separate from people. And that's the fatalism of that environmental sort of movement that first of all, it got separated from agriculture. And so ecology and environment became something that happened in forest reserves and the less people you have, the better. But for us, the people are part of, are an absolute integral part of that ecology. And all our farmers, each one has only 1 acre. So he identifies with his sort of terroirs, if you like, and these coffee regions are normally, as you would have noticed, they're in blocks on the hill. You know, they're kind of like a whole sort of forest environment. So each farmer has an adjacent farmer, and they're all one community. So whatever one farmer does, I mean, he's obviously looking to his neighbor because everyone knows what everyone's doing, you know? So that's the beauty of it. There is a symbiosis below the ground with the soil food web. And when you look after, when you nurture that soil food web below the ground, that naturally creates a symbiotic relationship with what's above ground. And it's inclusive of the farmers because they notice. They're the first ones to say, oh my God, look at my soil now. Now you see the smell, you know, they'll come and they'll bring excitedly their soil for me to smell it, you know. And that's when you've arrived, when you start, because they are the laboratories. We don't need to go to a laboratory. I mean, one of my teachers used to say that, you know, the olfactory sense, the eyes, the feel, those are your best laboratory analysis. And you walk around a farm, you have the sense of taste. You can smell something, you can see something, observe it, but you can also feel it. And those three elements are part of that, what we call the terroir of the farmer, and how his creativity can manipulate, can change that environment in order to make it better.
Right. And do the farmers actually taste their coffees? Do they get a chance to kind of understand what the finished product is?
Yeah, we've had some interesting. We have a coffeeologist, Hippolyte Corte. He comes over regularly every year, and we always make it a point of putting out coffees, and we'll mix it up a little bit and make it a little bit exciting. I mean, in the first trainings, first of all, we had to get them to understand that a green coffee will give a particular taste. A fully ripe coffee will give a particular taste. So we used to get these green coffees and we'd roast it and then we'd put it out and we wouldn't label it. We'd just say, okay, tell me about the coffees. And then they'd go, their senses are very alive. They say, oh, that one, not good. Whose coffee is that one? And so then at the end, we have to divulge that it's the green coffee. They say, now that's why you want only ripe coffee. Now we got it. That was like 10 years ago. Now it's gotten a much more more sophisticated, you know, like where they can tell the difference between their coffee, a high altitude coffee and what they can identify. They have quite a good sense. I have a wonderful story to tell about that because when we first took our farmers to a particular coffee lab in Bangalore, just for an introduction to coffee and whatnot. So all of the green coffees were all put out on a table. And we had Brazilian coffee there, we had Colombian coffee, we had Indian coffees, we had Timor coffee, everything was there. And one of our farmers from Dumbriguda, he went around the whole thing and we had a coffee expert there from Bangalore, from the coffee lab here. And he went round and he came back to this coffee and he says, oh, this is my coffee. This is from my village. And I looked at the coffee expert and I said, they're all coded. You know, they all have A, B, C, D and all that. And she looked at me and says, hey, come on, this guy is hallucinating. You know, what, is he, you know, did he have a smoke or what? And so I said, well, look, he's pretty firm about it. He said, no, you see the shape. See, our coffee in our village has that particular turn at the edge of the coffee. That's unique to our place. I don't know why, but that's... So she went back and decoded the thing, and she came back and her jaw absolutely dropped. She said, he's right on. It's his village, Dumbriguda. And so those are the kinds of beautiful gems that we find when you start working with a community, particularly a community that has been close to nature, that has not suppressed its senses, you know, that they go out into the forest, they hunt, they come back with herbs, they come back with medicines and all of that. So they haven't lost their senses are still alive. And that was the beautiful thing that we discovered there. We didn't want to smother that. We worked with it. And that way we can go on towards, you know, creating really, really beautiful coffees.
Yeah, and I think you have. I think some of the coffees that you've produced, they're quite amazing. Very, very delicate, though. And I think
Yes.
we've had a bit of a discussion about
Yes.
the challenge that I faced with them, because I'm used to much more heavier, robust kind of flavors. But
Yes.
what you've just entered the market in India recently, what's been the response to them?
All right. It's a very young market, you know, specialty coffee. It's a young market, but we've had some fantastic responses, you know, like people, because people have been abroad, you know, they've been exposed to taste. They've been in coffee tasting, just as when you go abroad, you can go into wine tasting, you know, you can travel around a wine region and taste wines. The same thing you can do also when you go abroad. So they come back, and there's certain sort of connoisseurs or would-be connoisseurs. They're interested, and they're pretty sophisticated. There's a niche, and you have to find that niche. You have to reach out to it. It's very much there. There is a culture there, and you would be surprised. There's a lot of people up north who are very interested in coffee and never can find good coffee. You know, when I first came out with my first coffees in way back in the 90s, and anytime I went up north for some work or something, they would ring me up and say, "Don't come unless you bring some packets of your coffee." And I say, "You can't get any coffee." "No, we can't get any coffee up there. The only place we can get coffee is in the it's in the what do you call it, the coffee board sort of
the cafe,
circus, you know." And it never got any broader than that. And that was a tragedy of Indian coffee. We exported. And I think we're on the cusp of a revolution now of tasting good coffees, wanting good coffees. I think we came at the right time.
Okay. I'm going to just stray a little bit away from our topic and kind of get a little bit into the experience of coffee. And you know, one of the things that about India, and you're talking about the demand in the north, the way that Indians make coffee. Do you think, in a way, that it is the way we are using the best techniques for coffee, or that, as with many of our other foods and the way that we create, we're just smothering the flavor?
Yeah, it's pretty much an abomination, if you like. I mean, I don't want to make it. That sounds like a terrible judgment on it. There's nothing I like better when I'm traveling in Tamil Nadu, and I stop at a degree coffee place, you know, in Tanjavur or somewhere, and drink that coffee that the meter coffee and whatnot. I mean, they have been able to roast it, mixed a little bit of chicory to thicken it. But the problem is it's been totally smothered with sugar.
Right.
So we're talking about a whole different culture here of
sugar and milk, really.
Yes. First of all, the milk. So you have to dark roast it. And we have compromised a lot. We have a little bit. We have sort of dark roasted a little. Well, it's not even dark roasted. It's sort of medium to medium dark. One of our selection coffee, which is drinkable with milk. But who would want to smother those nuances? You know, once you're introduced to a terroir coffee, suddenly you're, it just ruins your senses get dulled. Milk is the great sort of that calcium. It's if I can coin the term, it's very base, and so. It sort of like neutralizes everything. The acidity goes, and and then in order to be able to enhance the flavor, you throw in like half a cup of sugar, and then you get your kick.
Yeah,
I'm not sure whether it's the caffeine that kicks in or what it is, but then of course you also have to mix a little bit of Robusta to get that caffeine, because obviously your Arabicas are a little bit lighter in terms of caffeine, so people are looking for coffee for that. But I think on the whole, our coffee is more towards wine, and and you don't have to get tipsy, and it's healthy. Alcohol is not so healthy, so you've got a beautiful way of being able to enjoy coffee without all the bad health effects.
Fair
So
enough.
I mean, obviously you see this whole discovery of all the wonders, the health benefits of coffee, and in the beginning I thought it was being overstated by the coffee industry, but then more and more people tried to discredit it, and a lot of very, very sort of like upright sort of researchers got in there and said, boy, coffee does give those benefits, but the moment you put milk and sugar into it, those benefits go out the window. I mean, I had that funny incident in one of the coffee board festivals where we had a Norwegian came, and his whole thing was coffee for health. And he waxed eloquent for like 1 hour about, you can get your niacin from there, you can get your minerals, you can get this thing, you can get that thing, makes you feel good in the morning. And then at the end of it, I just had one simple question for him, and I put my hand up and I said, do all of these benefits qualify if you add milk and sugar? Oh no, it's out the window. And I said, okay, my case rests.
Okay.
So that's what our Araku coffee is about. It's about health. It's about health of the environment. It's about the ecology. It's about, supporting a whole community to make a profit and to be able to regrow their environment in the way that they dream. So that's the beauty of it.
Well, David, thank you so much for being here this evening with me. I couldn't have put it better in terms of why you need to try Araku, why you need to really experience the different kinds of coffees that they have, and what actually goes, the whole backstory that goes into them. And, it's not just another corporate company. It is a coffee that has roots in ecology and in people.
Absolutely.
Coming up on Wednesday, we have Pooja, Veer, and I will be talking about restaurants and what actually consumers are going to be, what are consumers expecting from restaurants as we head out in the various, as the lockdown gets reduced. So look forward to seeing you guys on Wednesday. David, thank you so much for being there. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you, Antoine.
See you guys.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.